Sure happy to see everyone here and happy to see everyone excited about gardening this year. That looks well on my business, that hopefully I can sell some more liners to the family, the team here. Who's heard of Walters Gardens before? This is some pretty avid gardeners then. Who's heard of Proven Winners before? Lots more. So I'll start off a little bit about where I work and a little bit about Proven Winners. Actually, I'll start with Proven Winners. So Proven Winners actually has its world headquarters in Sycamore, Illinois. Has anybody ever been to the world headquarters? Don't bother. Don't waste your time. It's a marketing company, and they have a old Blaine's Farm and Fleet building over in DeKalb that they occupy for some of the fertilizers and the other hard goods that are part of our brand. But how the brand works is really unique among commercial horticulture, and we're really proud to be a part of the brand. And how it works is our company where I work grows young plants, and we're a family-owned company, and that was one of the first criteria to be under that brand umbrella. We have a hybridizing team at Walters Gardens. We introduce between 30 and 70 new perennial plants to the commercial trade every year. And we do ridiculously extensive trialing among our facility, our fields, our farms, and send off things to other partner companies in every zone where our perennial plants ought to survive. And at any given time, we're evaluating 35,000 individual seedlings in our R&D area. And so 30 to 70 sounds like a really big number, but it's honestly the smallest number that we can whittle down out of our amazing hybrids. We partnered with Proven Winners in order to bring some of our new varieties to the market, and much of the cream of the crop of what we introduce finds its way into those white pots. And whenever we sell one of our varieties that is in the Proven Winners brand to Woldheis Farms, we collect from them a marketing fee that we pass on to the Proven Winners marketing company to spend on our behalf, and bring awareness to you of what we're doing. And so anybody that has any interest in gardening whatsoever knows that when you go online to search up something gardening related, shortly after that you start finding a whole bunch of banner ads and seeing this Proven Winners logo on most of those ads. And that work sort of in action. We work with lots of influencers and brand ambassadors around the Midwest especially, and give them some of our stuff in order to get some honest evaluations as well. And you can watch some of their social media feeds and hear some of their feedback and what worked and what didn't. A little more about Walters Gardens. We're going to be 80 years old in 2026, so we're in our 79th season of farming perennials, probably closer to a 100-year-old company, always been wholesale. Prior to Dennis Walters marrying Harriet, Harriet's family was farming peonies in a field there in Zeeland, Michigan, quite a while before he showed up. But Walters Gardens, as we know it, is 79 years old, and we've always been bare root perennial company. In the beginning, we were nothing else. And we continue that today. Our bare root fields currently are 1,750 acres. At any given time, about a third of that is in our perennial crops, all the way from these beautiful astilbes to hundreds of acres of daylilies. If you're not a daylily fan, promise I can show you around and I'll make you one. For about 40 years, we've been selling plugs out of our greenhouses as well, and that's a root ball about the size of your thumb, or a big wine cork up to about the size of your fist. And we ship plants 50 weeks out of the year, and there's customers from nurseries and greenhouses to garden centers and landscapers and everything in between that has something going on almost year round. We've been a hybridizing company now for about 20 seasons, and I'm pretty sure this is our 14th season of being part of the Proven Winners brand. And our ownership and management just sort of changed hands. We're in our third generation, and Ryan and Krista and Karen are the team that runs our company now. Proven Winners does the consumer marketing for us, but we're not too bad of a content factory. And if you want to go down a real social media rabbit hole, you can look at Walters Gardens, TikTok or Instagram, and see lots of really good short videos. This particular one is our Salvia nemorosa fields. We have varieties like May Night Salvia that are nearly infinite rebloom if you should deadhead them as the flowers are done. And I've got photography in our gardens of the Profusion series that's in the Proven Winners brand in August and then again in September that look just like it did back in May. So this is what it looks like when we're farming those plants out in our fields. It's fun to just watch that color go by. We've got options for all sorts of growers. This is an idea of what a bare root hosta looks like. Oh, that one's a daylily. And the smaller plugs of some Heucheras. Very small minimums for commercial companies. We work with people from about $300 all the way up to close to $3 million worth of plugs and bare root that they buy from us. And we try really hard to serve all of them as well as we possibly can. Our main catalog is 1,000 varieties of perennials, and of that, 250 are the Proven Winners brand ones. And every single Proven Winner perennial comes from our facility, the young planted. Gonna jump right into plants. One of my favorites is sort of an oldie but goodie. We haven't improved on it at Walters Gardens yet. This is Aurelia Sun King. If you don't have it in your yard, Japanese spikenard is a big chartreuse plant that takes up a really nice amount of space in a shade garden, and it's a big pop of color. They're virtually no maintenance. It's one of those trim them if they're not tidy kind of things, and if you don't want to, then just clean it up at the end of the year. Goat's beard is, I got to think sometimes about what the common name is because I'm talking to growers all the time in Latin. Goat's beard here is a really good plant to use in the shade. If you're used to using a stilbe, you know that a stilbe or false spirea takes a lot of water in order to keep really nice all summer long. If it ever dries down, then that's kind of it for that plant for the season until next year. You get a very similar texture from goat's beard, and it's a plant that can handle a little bit of sun if it's consistently moist soil, but if you have it in the shade, it can handle dry downs a lot more resiliently than an astilbe can. This Chantilly lace variety is sort of a medium height. The straight species ones, dioecious, is up in this range, and ossifolius, I can't always pronounce the name correctly, can be anywhere from this tall to that tall. And the beard on them is really big and showy, and I'd absolutely encourage you to look for those, but they don't always have their place. I should back up and stop for a second to talk a little more. I thought I had a slide or two about the process of making new varieties. Walters Gardens and other hybridizers in commercial horticulture, our hybridizing is not much different than what bees do when they cross-pollinate plants. We take pollen from one plant and put it on another plant, and we collect the seeds out and plant them and see what happens. Hopefully it's an educated guess, but we're really just putting genetics into a brown paper bag and shaking them up and seeing what happens after that. And we're really conscious about trying to make things more disease resistant, more weather tolerant, better habits for our yards that are not native like the woods is, or the prairie or the meadow, in the back 40, and things that'll be better suited to today's gardeners. And we usually have at our research farm where a plant has to make it for 2 winters in order to survive into the next round of trialing. And if it has all the traits that we were looking for in that cross, we'll propagate it and put it in some landscape trials on our property, as well as send it off to all those partners I mentioned earlier. And usually 2 more winters, we watch it there. And we'll be also propagating enough to do some production trials and see how it does in pots for our wold heises of the world. And usually then, after that 4th season will be when we'll know if we're going to try to put it in the catalog or not. And usually after that, it takes us another season or 2 because all of our new varieties, we patent them and we trademark some of the names. And in order to do that, we have to do propagation from cuttings and tissue culture. And it takes us a couple years to ramp up to numbers that are big enough that we can sell all over North America. And so 5 or 6 years of watching a variety is the fastest that we can possibly bring it to market. And there's others that are 10, 12, 15 years, depending on what it is. Aruncus took us a little while. Chantilly lace is a variety. This thing's been around for 12 years now, and a lot of people haven't even heard about it. This particular variety, Chantilly lace. I really like the spent flowers as much as I like the white ones when they're in full bloom in the spring. They bloom about the same time as those Salvia nemorosas that I mentioned, so kind of early to mid or so May, depending on the season. And it only gets to about waist high in the landscape. Then we also have a little bitty one called fairy hair. Here it is in our gardens at Walters Gardens in a crevice space, so a crevice garden. Anybody have a crevice garden in your yard? It's a new trend that's coming to make little cracks for things to kind of suffer and pay their penance, I guess, to maybe make it. And this is a plant that'll do that. It can handle that dry spell. And it's a really fine texture foliage, a very grassy sort of texture, and it's only a foot or so tall. And it's totally covered in flowers when it's in bloom. By the way, if it has a WG on the top, it means we introduced it. If it has a Proven Winner logo on the top, it means we probably also introduced it at Walters Gardens, but it's going to be in a white pot instead of a other color pot. Virginia. Anybody have Virginia in your yard? So our hybridizer, the head of our new product development team is Hans Hansen. He comes to us from Minnesota, and he has a long history of new varieties of hostas, especially. He's one of the most prolific hybridizers maybe ever. And he was hybridizing perennials in his mom's garden when he was 9 years old. And Virginia was one of the things he played with. And there's a number of other things that now that we've been working with him all these years, we're introducing things that were in grandma's garden or great grandma's garden that maybe aren't suited to our style of gardening anymore if they had been those varieties, but we've taken out some of the challenges and we're reintroducing better versions that do really, really well. So in the case of Virginia, this Miss Piggy variety is one that has all of the traits dialed up. So it's got bigger, thicker leaves than the old pig squeak, great big flower stalks the size of your finger, really big chunky traits and a big show when it's in bloom. And there's quite a number of other varieties. We have Peppermint Patty and Proven Winners that's kind of a striped, and then there's a white one on the non-branded side. And we're even working with a species that's deciduous that dies back to the ground in the wintertime. One drawback on Virginia is after winter, there'll be some brown parts to it that you clean up, and then you leave the green parts so that it's got a factory to start up and flower again in the spring. So there's a little bit of maintenance to these. They're hosta-like without being quite as deer food. And that shiny green leaf is a really nice effect among all the yellows and the blues and light greens that you might have in the shade. This one is one that we introduced sort of by accident over 20 years ago, Jack Frost, Virginia. We didn't on purpose select it, but it was a natural hybrid, I think, that happened in our production facility where we had a block that was entirely different than the rest. This one was much more disease resistant than all the other Brunneras, or Siberian bug loss for the common name. And so we introduced it. It had a really crisp variegation, and the leaves held up nicely through the summer heat. This is another plant for the shade that deer and rabbits often tend to leave alone. It's a chewy texture, and it's a hairy leaf, and they tend to leave those alone more than things that don't have them. This was a really good plant. This is one of our landscape staples that every landscaper uses if they're introducing shade plants. We've had some really good intentional breeding on Siberian bug loss of late. This variety is called Sterling Silver, and it's a good step forward from Jack Frost in terms of that disease. So the disease that Brunnera get in the summertime is called anthracnose leaf spot. So you get brown edges, and then pretty soon the whole leaf kind of just melts away, and it's done by the end of August, and you just have to wait till next year. It's not necessarily a detriment to the plant, but it's nice to have one that goes all the way until the frost finishes it off. Sterling silver is a good improvement on that, and it's a bigger leaf with lots more frosting on it. In proven winners, we have this Jack of Diamonds. It's the current proven winner perennial of the year. This one is every bit as good, if not more, than sterling silver for that disease resistance, but it looks a little bit more like Jack Frost. The initial leaves, and then you get those blue forget-me-not flowers. After the flowers on both Jack of Diamonds and sterling silver, you'll get another round of leaves, and they're all like this big. They're huge leaves. And none of that anthracnose leaf spot. I wanted to show this one because when Trevor sent me the shade plant list, this one showed up in it, and it's really easy to make that mistake when you're shopping a garden center. Dicentra pink diamonds and its teammate white diamonds are actually not shade plants. So it's a bleeding heart. The picture looks like your typical bleeding heart, but it is an alpine species that Hans went and found on the side of a mountain growing in between some rocks. And if you have a gravel pit in your yard, this is the plant for that. But it's got to be full sun and dry. And if you put it in that kind of spot, it'll be super happy, and it'll flower from Mother's Day well past Labor Day without any fuss and any deadheading or anything. This species doesn't die back in the summer heat like the old-fashioned bleeding heart does for the shade. So by all means buy it, but don't put it in the shade. Who has epimediums in your yard? More than I expected. The common name for epimedium is barrenwort. It's the ultimate plant if you have deer and if you have dry shade. This plant, Sandy Claus, is a great example of beautiful foliage and a more mounding habit than some of the straight species ones from Asia. So you'd have Epimedium sulphureum and Epimedium rubrum that would be really just prostrate ground cover plants and really wimpy flowers. The flowers look like little orchids, but on the straight species ones, the flowers would be sort of hidden under the foliage in the early spring. So there's been a lot of hybridizing work done on these plants of late. This Sandy Claus, it has really nice burgundy in it when the season starts out on the leaf, and it's got really neat thorns along the leaves. They won't pick you, but you definitely don't want to roll around in it. And it's a good mounding habit. Of late, though, we've been working more and more on them in focusing on the flowers. And so this one won't be available yet here at Woldhuis's. We've got, I think, 6 or 7 varieties that Walters Gardens has produced that also have that nice mounding habit in interesting traits on their foliage, but then big flower spikes that sit on top of the habit that you can see when they're in bloom. And further down the road, maybe in 2027, we're going to have reblooming epimediums. So these are expensive plants to produce. They don't do well from tissue culture or cutting, and so we have to grow them in stock pots in our greenhouses at Walters Gardens. And we grow a whole season in a gallon pot, and then once a year we take those gallons out and we tear them apart and we put them in plug trays, and then the following spring we ship them to the Woldhuises of the world. Epimediums are prone to a virus that can bother our food crops. I can't recall which food crop or which virus, but we go to really long lengths to keep that virus out of our stock plants so that we're not shipping it to our customers. And we do so well with it that states that prohibit epimedium from being shipped into them allow us to ship ours. And so having a nice clean stock helps to make sure that the traits we were hoping for in the foliage and in the flowers are all there and true all the time as well. So they'll be priced a lot like the hellebores you see, and they'll be good combination plants with hellebores as well, because hellebore are on the deer and rabbit resistant side. For the growers, this is actually a little bit easier than a hellebore to get established. On the hellebores, so we do have a few here to look at. The prettiest ones are actually not Walters Gardens traits just yet. These are bought in from one of my customers, but I wanted to have them both here to explain the differences. There's a couple of different species of hellebores or Lenten roses, and if you grow them in your yard, in the past, this species that has this really netted leaf, this really bicolor sort of leaf, almost variegated, and really dark green. This is Helleborus niger. And this type of species does really well from tissue culture, and it flowers in the first year that the grower would plant it. So every time you see one of these frost-kissed ones, they're in full bloom. It wasn't until very recently that this species would only be white. It would be 150 shades of white at a garden center to get this species. And they're nice habits. They're pretty reserved in their growth. They make a nice little mound, and they're pretty long-lived, but the show is just such a certain way. This one, or this group, is a hybrid type that we have to do from seed. And we work with this species, Orientalis is the species that we call, or hybridus, because over the years, some of the different species makeup maybe got a little bit cloudy. But in this species makeup, we were able to get a lot of different colors, a lot of spots on the petals, and we've developed ones that are more side-facing, especially if it's a double in this honeymoon series or wedding party series. The wedding parties are double and the honeymoon are single. I'm not sure why that is. I don't think we ran that through the naming committee too well when we first came up with it, but we worked with this species, and we do have a seed nursery in order to cross back to the parents to keep the varieties true to the pictures and the names that we give them. And up until really recently with this series, these were the ones that had all the color. The other difference in Helleborus is with this Orientalis type, you get a big plant over a couple of seasons of time. And the cut flower people really like this species over this species because this stalk is really resilient and it goes great in a vase for quite a few days. It's not going to be a 3-week long cut flower like a chrysanthemum or something, but certainly if you're having a party and you've got a long weekend and you want to put vases of Lenten rose together, this would be the species to work with. These ones tend to be really early in the spring. Sometimes another drawback with all the white ones is they would flower before even the snow is gone, or they'd be right there as the snow left. And then these ones are a few weeks after. So in our gardens in Michigan, they're just starting to send up some new green, and the buds will be in 3 or 4 weeks of warmer weather. So it'll maybe hit the Lent season, but it'll be toward the end of it. We have some prettier pictures on the plants that you see. In this case, you kind of have to buy the dream and take it home with you. So Spanish Flare is in that single group in the honeymoon series, and it's a creamy white to yellow. In a lot of cases, it's a more yellow than white, and it's got a beautiful eye zone with red specks that go out into the petal. I really like Tropical Sunset. It's a really solid yellow, and the pinks and the reds are really good, consistent veins throughout the petals, and it's a bright show, even if you don't have much other color going on that early in the spring. Here's the doubles. The wedding party series has Blushing Bridesmaid, which is more white than the picture shows, but that red comes and goes with the weather and the season. So some years you'll have lots of red and pink, and other years you'll have a little more white, but that streaking is really showing. This is the best seller of the entire lineup, Confetti Cake. Even though it's white, those polka dots of red in the middle are just a huge pop color. And it's the most profuse blooming one and the most vigorous one of all the ones we have. The newest one is Mother of the Bride. This one is a really beautiful blush pink that shows up from a mile away and has a lot of those really nice polka dots all over it too. Both these are similar plants, and the only difference between the two series is the wedding parties are doubles and the honeymoons are singles. Next is another oldie but goodie that we haven't really improved on yet, Heuchera, or Japanese forest grass. We carry 2 varieties at Walters Gardens, so the all gold is just gold, and then areola is variegated, and it's a little bit tough to tell from the picture, but there's a stripe down the side of that leaf, and in some cases right down the middle too, so kind of like the the yellow in the middle is a two stripes, and it's like a green background. The best plants to drive in around the base of a tree are either hellebores or epimediums, because they can handle dry, and they don't seem to care. They don't have much of a root mass either, and so the roots will sort of find their way around, and they'll be happy once they get established. Heuchera needs some pretty good consistent moisture, and so while we show it under trees, there's probably some either heavier soils or some supplemental irrigation to keep them happier as we go. You probably do need to have a wink of direct sun on these forest grasses to get some of that more vibrant color. If it's total dark shade, it might not keep it quite as well. And I don't know that it's a forever perennial either. If you have Heuchera for 5 or 6 or 10 years, it'll sort of run its course and you'll want to rejuvenate it. It's not a clumping grass in the same way as miscanthus maidengrass or panicum switchgrass, like those that you can split and rejuvenate. I think it'd probably take a new plant over time where it just kind of drifts away. The other thing about this particular grass, it does really well on the edges where you can let it sort of drift over. I love that as a texture, and people use them as a container plant as well. You just have to be really careful with the moisture, because like those astilbes I mentioned, if they dry down, they're just not going to be the same plant as when you started. And they're about the only grasses that do well in any amount of shade. Most ornamental grasses. The other thing that gets lumped in with them is carex, and there's a lot of carex varieties or sedges that aren't really grasses that'll do pretty well in shade too, but you got to look at the species. And we have a flood of them coming in a couple years. So if I get invited to talk back again, I'll update you on those another day. Next, we'll do a whole host of coral bells. So all of the coral bell work that's done at Walters Gardens is with native species. And when I talk about native species, I'm not trying to trot out and be the restoration nursery guy and sell you a prairie and sell you a meadow. Your yard isn't that. But we do go out into those places and find some really awesome traits and bring them back. And when we put all of our genetics in that brown paper bag and shake them up, we hope that we get to keep the best of the traits that we found and replace some of the worst of the traits. That being said, we work a lot with Heuchera americana and Heuchera villosa. And our smaller ones in this timeless series are heavier on a Heuchera americana. And as you go up in size and get some more of the more brilliant colors in the foliage, you can look at the stems and identify Heuchera villosa by lots of hair on the petioles of the leaves and the flower stalks. And that's great. That's what we have to do to get bigger plants with some of those brilliant colors. But that Heuchera villosa is a southern species that's really good for heat and humidity. It's also very drought tolerant. Not Epimedium or Helleborus drought tolerant, but it can take a lot of dry. And what happens with coral bells in a lot of our yards, especially if it's Walters Gardens genetics, is if you put them in the front of the border in heavy soil and your sprinklers hit them all the time, they're not happy. They really need to have good drainage all the time. Heuchera americana can do a little more, but if you have a wetter spot and you want some of those colors of a coral bells, it's good to use what I'm going to talk about later. That's a hybrid between coral bells and foam flower or Heucherella. And so foamy bells is the hybrid, I guess. The other thing to look at is if you have a really bright color or greens and chartreuses and some of the oranges, they need to have morning sun at most. When you get into the really dark leafed, the nearly black burgundies and the really dark purples, they can take basically full sun. A little more consistent moisture is required when you get to that, but they're quite variable on the sun spectrum as long as the moisture is more right. that long neck that happens, or the crown sort of heaving out of the ground with coral bells, really is when they're on the wet side for a period of time. They're trying to drag themselves out of that. And some of the villosa parentage in them also just naturally happens that way, where they actually don't mind being sort of hacked back to rejuvenate the crown. It's painful to do that on a big stalk like that, but before it gets so heavy, it's good to give them a little trim and let them come back up from the crown. So within coral bells at Walters Gardens, we have 4 collections that I'll talk about, and then a 5th group with the foamy bells. So the way they're organized in my slide deck is the timeless group is putting the coral bells back into coral bells. They're much smaller plants, but they're in constant flower. Once they start blooming in the spring, they're just not going to stop all the way until the end of the season. And these will be a little more moisture tolerant. The medium collection is a Dolce collection in Proven Winners, and then there's 2 larges. There's a Primo collection, and then Primos with ruffles are the dressed up collection. So hopefully that makes a little more sense as we go along. So Timeless, one of the very first Heuchera crosses that we made and introduced was Berry Timeless, and this is one of the best sellers that we have. That green leaf is really sturdy and tough all summer long, and we never see any sort of burning, even in just a little bit of sun. And those pink flowers are hard to beat. Hummingbirds love them. This Timeless collection does really well in containers. The foliage is beautiful, the flowers are a bonus, and it doesn't hurt that they're nearly constant. So this is Timeless Glow. It's a chartreuse one. It'll need a little more shade. And then Timeless Night is a jet black burgundy, and it's a nice little mounding plant with a dark red flower. Really hard to beat the color on that. It's the glossiest dark leaf one that we have too. And then the last one in the Timeless group is Timeless Treasure, and it's got a really dark background and a lot of frosting on it. So it's a silver foliage one and a soft pink flower. And as I said, that whole collection is nearly constant bloom when it's in blossom. Next is a Dolce collection. They have a little bit of that Heuchera villosa depending on the variety. This cherry truffles can take quite a bit of sun. You can see it's next to a really neat sedum variety in a sunnier spot. It's a great container variety as well. And it seems like the aged flowers or aged leaves are just as pretty as the fresh leaves as it goes on. I really like the dark sort of mahogany leaves as they go. In the Primo collection, I won't show it today, but we have a mahogany monster that's a similar coloration but a much bigger plant. Then you have Silver Gumdrop, which is the most frosted variety we have. It's a little more prostrate, a little more low to the ground, and it's got a soft pink flower. Then we have Spearmint in the Dolce collection. Big difference between Berry Timeless and Spearmint is Spearmint has got a little more gloss to the leaf. It actually has more flowers, a little more intermittent though than Berry Timeless. And then the best-selling coral bells in our entire catalog is Wild Berry. It was the Proven Winners Perennial of the Year a couple of seasons ago. It's got an amazing gloss to it, and the veins in between the purple are quite pronounced, but it almost looks like they're set under glass. And this one has sort of a creamy flower that's a little more nondescript, but Wild Berry does well in pretty full sun, as well as pretty full shade. And then in the Primo collection, these have quite a bit more almost straight Heuchera villosa parentage in their genetic makeup, and these are bigger plants. They're far more vigorous than all the ones I've talked about to this point. And Black Pearl was our flagship until Wild Berry took it over. So it's probably number 2 or 3 selling in our catalog now. But it gets big, and the leaves are quite large, especially the initial bunch of them. And the initial leaves are as dark as can be, and depending on the season and the water and the sun exposure, they'll trail into a more burgundy color, which isn't ugly either. And then Peachberry Ice, a great variety it's a bright orange softens to a darker orange, and then it gets some of this frosting over it as well. Every time you look at peachberry ice, it's a different color. And this is a nice big one with big leaves too. And then wild rose, probably a third again bigger, half again bigger than wild berry, and it doesn't have quite the gloss on the leaf. It's still a beautiful, awesome veination. This picture is from the end of September, so they are on the evergreen side. You don't have to trim them all the way back to the ground in the fall. You kind of want to let them go through the winter and see what dried off or what the plant shed, and sort of pull those leaves off. Otherwise, it's got to start all over again, which in the middle of the growing season, if you want to tighten it up and make that giraffe neck crown go down a little bit, that's the time to do it, not at the very beginning of the season. But otherwise, they go all the way into winter looking like this. And then this is the one dressed up series one that they carry here at Woldhuis's, evening gown. So it's a lot like black pearl, but it's got more ruffles to the leaves, a little more substance going on in the texture. And we have a chartreuse in that collection and a frosted one coming up as well. These are the foamy bells. So in the Proven Winners lineup, we have the Fun and Games collection. The neat thing about foam flower or Heucherella is the flower is entirely different. The plants are all related, but it's a whole different look on the flower. And these are pretty consistent through the season as it goes on. And I Spy is a really nice chartreuse with a deep burgundy center. And I think among the chartreuses, I Spy is one of the most rugged in terms of burning if it does get a glimpse of sun. Then we have Catching Fire, which is a more round leaf and more bronze burgundy in the middle than I Spy. Almost identical flower to I Spy. And then we have Pumpkin Spice, which is a whole different direction for foliage. Pumpkin Brown or Pumpkin Orange. And that did it for Heucheras and Heucherellas. Next up is a Jacob's Ladder. This one was introduced north of Chicago, so it can handle cold. And Intrinsic Perennials brought this out a number of years ago, and we picked it up to help do some consumer marketing around it, because it's one of the only ones that will do pretty full sun here in the Midwest. Like that, Astilbe, consistent moisture is required if you want to move it out into some sun. In the shade, it won't be quite as brilliant of a burgundy color when the new flush of foliage comes on, but it'll be there either way. And then the flowers have a heavy, strong scent towards a lilac smell when they're in bloom. So mid-May, almost the end of May is when they're in their first round of blossoms, and they can be encouraged to rebloom a little bit more. And then the leaves are just this solid green after the foliage is done hardening off. I will say that Jacob's Ladder can be a little prone to powdery mildew in the summertime, and we did see Heaven Sent get some on in our gardens, but it was a testament to the vigor of this plant that after the first leaves got a little powdery mildew on them, then it just powered through and grew another batch of leaves over top, and they were perfect. So we were happy to see that. Then we have Tricertus or Formosa toad lily, which is sort of another one of those old-fashioned plants. It's hard to propagate until you try to do it in tissue culture, and then we have lots of them. This is what the flower looks like. It's another sort of orchid, little dainty flower that you have to be close up to appreciate. It does need really consistent moisture. At times they would naturalize next to a pond, I suppose. The variegated foliage is a really nice bonus to go with the flowers as well. And then, of course, we can't have a shade plant talk without talking about hostas. So hosta is still the number one perennial. It's still the number one perennial at Walters Gardens. We only grow about 110. If you come to our gardens, in Zeeland, we do have a public garden that's open for people to walk through at their leisure during business hours. If there's cars in the parking lot, you're welcome to peruse there. You just can't walk past the signs that say don't walk past this sign. That takes a me to give you a tour. So we have, I think, 12 in the Proven Winners lined up under the Shadowland Collection name. And those are some of the most unique ones that we've come across, or maybe top of trait would be a better way to put it. And these 4 really carry that message for me. And we have a Hosta of the Year in Proven Winners every year. So these ones have all been winners of that. On the top left, we have Coast to Coast. It's classified as a giant hosta by the Hosta Society folks, and it is the only yellow giant that stays yellow as the season goes on. It doesn't trail off into a green color later on. And we do have a large that we added a little bit ago that does that as well. In the top right was this past season's Hosta of the Year in Proven Winners. It's called Hudson Bay, and it's a giant that takes forever to get to a giant size. And it's worth the wait though, because there's so much substance there to that blue, green, and yellow leaf that it puckers in the middle. It almost looks like it's tattooed with substance. The current Proven Winners Hosta of the Year for 2025 is Miss America. This is the only hosta that I can tell from the driveway that it's Miss America. It's got a plasticky texture, for lack of a better scientific term, where a lot of the other high substance hostas have more of a rubbery texture. So this is very glossy and feels like plastic when you're touching the leaf. But the flowers are what make Miss America really distinct. They're up to my chest, and the stalks you can see are blonde in color. The flowers are side facing, and they're as big as a petunia. So when that thing is in bloom, you know for sure it's Miss America, because there's nothing even close to it for the blossoms. And then we carry the largest in commercial commerce, probably not the largest among collectors, but Empress Wu is the hosta that we started with in Proven Winners. It was a cultivar that was selected, and we just had the honor of being able to put it into our brand when we started with the brand. With an IV of water and fertilizer, Empress Wu can get to 96 inches or so in diameter and 4 foot plus in height. It's nice to put a little girl on the tag to show what a younger plant looks like, but when you get to that maximum potential, you got to put a grown-up in to show behind it. We also have Woo La La, not this one, but Woo La La is a variegated sport of Empress Wu, which also gets virtually the same size. Also, while we're in giant land, this one is called Gigantosaurus. And this one has even thicker leaves than some of those other ones that I mentioned. It just totally feels fake when you touch the leaves. It's a really nice blue-green center. It's a brighter blue-green than Empress Wu has, and a pretty crisp, creamy white edge. Lone Star here is a sport of a giant yellow, giant chartreuse. Key West was selected by a lady that wanted to have a hosta for every of the 50 states. So Key West covered her Florida. Lone Star was a sport of Key West that we discovered in our propagation. And because it has so much more green in the center than Key West, it has potential to be much bigger than Key West. That more chlorophyll can make it a bigger plant. And we've been watching it a while, and we think it might get bigger width-wise than Empress Wu and Woo La La. So stay tuned. Lone Star, named after Texas, might be the biggest one in commercial commerce next. Otherwise, it's a pretty sharp-looking plant anyway. We have a lot of strapped-leafed ones. A number of years ago, Hans introduced one called Curly Fries. Curly Fries nowadays is a little bit wimpy. It was a great plant when we started with it, but we have a bunch that are better. And we've got a blue version here called Silly String, which is just an impeccable bright blue everywhere you put it. It's tough as nails. It's bigger than a miniature, but it fills up the space you give it. And it's just a great bright blue with a totally different texture. And it has beautiful flowers as well. and it does really well as a container plant. Hans has been interested in a cross between two tropical plants, agave and manfreda, that we call mangave. And we went nuts with introducing them because the tissue culture process is really similar to hostas. And one of our mangaves is called Bad Hair Day. So we go between silly string as a hair and Bad Hair Day as hair. And then there's a future mangave if we get to selling enough mangaves that we'd introduced, and it's called dreadlocks. Terms of endearment on the non-branded side of our business is a really good replacement for Francis Williams. Francis Williams, a really traditional, nice big one with this really rich blue in the middle in this candy apple green edge, or Granny Smith apple green edge. But the trouble with Francis Williams is if it gets even a glimpse of sun in the summertime, it just melts. This one is what we call a tetraploid version of that. So there's elevated ploidy level in plants, so extra chromosomes. That's as far as my knowledge can take it to understand the difference. But all of our elevated ploidy level plants have got thicker flower stalks, heavier substance to the leaves, a lot more going on in that plant. Almost like adding steroids to them. And in terms of endearment, doesn't burn anywhere near like Francis Williams does. It's a really tough plant. I really like this one. Another one of those strap leaf ones. It's called Time in a Bottle, and it's got a chartreuse to green leaf. But what's awesome about Time in a Bottle is the flower is never opened. So the plant is tricked into thinking that it's not doing its job. It never produces a seed from that flower. So the flowers themselves last for a really long time, like 6 weeks of this color. It looks like firecrackers on top of the plant, or not burning firecrackers, but before you light them. And if you trimmed them back before they were finished, you'd get another batch, not nearly as full, but a whole nother batch of leaves, which doesn't really happen in hostas. Get it, another batch of hostas, another batch of flowers. This is Hans. And if you do come to the gardens, we have a whole team of greeters on the payroll too. They'll come and say hello to you and beg for attention. So if you don't like cats, maybe that spot's not the place for you either, because they're pretty persistent. And Hans's arm covers are some of those mangaves. A guy from Europe developed the arm sleeves, and you can actually buy them on Amazon, I think. In Mad About Mangave branding. Now for some bad news. A plant that collectors have been searching for, because part of the process of introducing hostas to the market is we have to register the name with the American Hosta Society years before we can introduce the plant. And so the name has been out there and the description has been out there for a long time. I'm pretty sure this sport was discovered over a decade ago. And we're only now talking about introducing it. And we actually sent trial plants here to the Old Ice team last summer. And we had really good yields of true plants that had the variegation the way it looks like this on our initial batches from our tissue culture lab. Our sort of minimum is like 50 or 60% that are true. We like 90%, a lot better. But we can price to the 50% if it's something worthwhile. But then when we pulled the lever to go to tens of thousands of plantlets from the tissue culture lab, we got like 27% yield. And so it's going to be another year of punting this variety down the road for most people. If you are a collector and you find one, I would grab it, because it'll be a commercially produced collector item. And it'll be priced accordingly wherever anybody does have it. What is awesome about it is if you have in your hosta garden one called White Feather or White Christmas, those ones come up almost entirely white, right? And then if they get a glimpse of sun, they burn. Or if they don't, then they just turn entirely green by the end of the summer, and they look like any other plain old green hosta. What's neat with this one is it does transition, but I think the mature leaf that's transitioned into more green looks nicer than the heavy white one. And it is a sport of that Empress Wu, and so it's a big plant. It's not that big, but it's got plenty of vigor to get it through every season as it goes on. And it seems that when the variegation is true, it's really consistent and stable. And when you get one, it should last for a long time and not revert back to parentage. So I talked about it. Another thing about Emperor's New Clothes that we noticed in the variety, in the tissue culture that's not true, on a percentage, some of that green migrates to the outside edge, and it's consistent enough that we can actually call it another variety. So if you see frog in my throat, that variety is from the same breeding lines, and it's just ones that I don't want to say they didn't make it to Emperor's New Clothes because it's still an awesome variety, but it's some that we can sort out of that production line. And then one plant that I didn't see here on the buying list at Wold Ices is Orridenia. And I bring this up because it's kind of fun. Even in 2024, we're still inventing and discovering new genus of plants, not even just species. But this is a plant that, anybody familiar with Muckdenia for a shade plant? It's a nice big leaf, and it's a ground covery, and it's a shiny, glossy green, and it turns a brilliant, bright red in the fall. It's a very inconsistent grower in your yard, which is nice, and it's an inconsistent grower in our greenhouse, which is not so nice. Hans had done a cross between Muckdenia and another obscure plant in the same family. These are also related to coral bells and to Virginia, same family. Usually when you're doing crosses between plants, between genuses, they have to be the same family at least. Outside of that, the flowers just aren't compatible. So Muckdenia crossed with Orestrophe makes Orridenia. And so this variety, Hans wasn't super happy with the cross, and he kind of just left it in his yard and ignored it. It kept coming back every year. But then he went botanizing over in Europe, and there was a horticulturalist at a botanic garden, I think in Sweden. And that guy was like, Hans, come on over. I got to show you something you've never seen before. It was the exact same cross, the same idea in mind that two entirely different people thought up. And it turned out that the one from Sweden was a nicer plant. This is a beautiful mound. It's like a big coral bells, but glossy green leaves. The flowers come up in the early spring about the same time as the Lenten roses. And sometimes, even though it's a evergreen leaf, sometimes there's no foliage there at all. The flowers come up, then the leaves, and then in the fall, you still get that brilliant red fall color. And more than anything for us, we can actually make it for our customers so they can grow it for you. So just something to look for in the future. It's something we're so excited as we keep working with plants to come up with new and different things. You'd think nothing is new under the sun, but occasionally it is. And that's it for my slide deck. Any questions for me? Walters Gardens is in Zeeland, Michigan. Zeeland, Michigan is next door to Holland, Michigan, a little more famous, and maybe 20 miles from Grand Rapids. So we're adjacent to a lot of really good summer vacationing on the beach. Tulip Time Festival is a big deal if you haven't been to that. We don't have as much going on as our gardens at that time, but it's still worth a peek.